All right, we're just going to take a few minutes, or sorry, a few seconds to let people start to come in. All right, well, welcome everybody. We have Peg Bier here today doing shade gardens. For those of you who regularly attend these webinars, I'm not Sally Burrows. Sally, unfortunately, is a little under the weather today. Even though she's down in Florida, she's matching the weather that we have outside here in Northern Virginia. So my name is Daniel Kapp. I'm usually the one behind the camera. For those of you who have seen Peg's webinars before, she's the one that I'm the one she's usually talking to in the background there. So just a few housekeeping things to go through before we start. First and foremost, we are recording this today. So if any of you ever if you lose connection and you're not able to watch the rest of the webinar, or if you want to watch it again, that will be ready in a few days' time. Sally, I believe, sends that out in an email. If you don't get that email, you're welcome to email her at sburrows@mgcmail.com. You can also reach out to us through our website on our contact form. That will actually go to me, and I can also get you that link. It's a YouTube link that we send out. I know that in the past we've been having a little bit of problems with some of our emails, like with our coupons. So also, if you do not get the after webinar email that has the coupon in it, also reach out to Sally or myself via her email or through our contact us form. But so I think that's about it. So let's dive right in. We have the woman that needs no introduction. We have Peg Bier here, who's been with us for how many years now has it been, Peg?
It's going on 46.
46 years, 46 years. I invite you to take it away, Peg, and we're all ears.
Well, thank you, Danny, and welcome to our program on shade gardening. Good afternoon. And it's a good time to be inside planning about the garden. I have lived with varying degrees of shade in my home for 63 years. Not many people stay in one place that long. And so I've learned quite a bit about shade gardens in that period of time. The first thing, and the interesting thing is, I have a couple of granddaughters actually that I'm working with, but one particular one this last weekend with a new townhome. They've been in it for a year, and they have a lovely enclosed backyard, which has morning sun in one area and afternoon sun in the other area. And fortunately, the people before her planted a few really nice things. Now, outside the wall and around the foundation of the house, we are adding two, and they want to create a bed primarily of perennials, maybe a few annuals to carry the color through, for the birds, bees, and butterflies, and also for the beauty that is within that type of garden. And so it's been fun saying to them, okay, girls, how much sun does this area receive in morning sun? How much in the afternoon? So it's important to know, do you have dappled light throughout the day? Do you have morning sun? Do you have afternoon sun? Primarily the plants that I'm talking about today are plants that will thrive in dappled light or in full morning sun, and would prefer not to have the hottest scorching afternoon sun. There are a few that will tolerate that, but most of them are geared to that dappled light through the day or morning sun or patches of the afternoon sun. Okay, so let's bring up this first one, and let's talk a little bit about ferns. Ferns are a wonderful addition to a shade garden. In this particular spot in my own garden, and I am going to use one section of my garden today to really elaborate upon the plants that are within that garden, and to let you know that this garden in its small sections could be reproduced even in a townhouse garden. Okay, so this is taken in a large bed that, for whatever reason, I think there's a little underground spring that particularly is active when it's wet in the early spring and then kind of dries out after that. But the ostrich fern decided to plant themselves there. I had ostrich fern in other areas, and they transferred over into this area. And so I decided, okay, let's just let that go. And I really love it. I do. And I also love the accent of pieces of statuary in certain places within the garden. I don't want to overdo it, but I enjoy some of them. The lovely little lady that's here is a concrete piece. Okay, I'm going to show you basically the area that we will be talking about today. And I'm going back to do close-up pictures of some of these plants. Now, the canopy of this garden is large trees. Primarily in my garden, they're oak, tulip poplar. There is a little bit of cherry there. I have really large native American holly in that area also. And I have a few large magnolia where it gets a lot more sun. Okay, so this is the canopy. Now, in large gardens, you can have tall trees like that. In smaller gardens, in a townhouse garden, it would be difficult. But what you can have is the understory tree. And there are so many beautiful, beautiful trees that can be used as understory trees. Here in my own garden, there's a lot of dogwood, different varieties of dogwood. There's redbud, there's Chiananthus or fringe tree, which is native, okay? All of those are native. There's a lot of Japanese maple. I'm so fond of Japanese maple. No, it is not native. I do not want to do without a lot of my plants that are not native. I have the cascading Japanese maples, and I have the upright Japanese maples, and I have many different varieties of them, so that there's different growth patterns and different color patterns within the leaves, okay? There are a lot of shrubs. There's a lot of azalea. There's rhododendron. There's boxwood. There's Lakothaway, plus others, okay? And they give color off and on, some of them, through the season. And then I will use annuals for some color. But this is springtime in my garden. And in the next picture, this is summertime in my garden. And it's taken from probably about upstairs window down on that same area. And what you're seeing primarily is the understory, okay? It's the Japanese maple, it's the dogwood, it's all those things that were flowering that are no longer flowering. And so most of the color in flowers is coming from the annuals, which primarily are in containers there on my deck. Now, this is incredibly interesting. Think about what you may or may not need in your garden, look at the color of the plant. Look at the texture of the plant, because that is what is going to make it interesting throughout the rest of the seasons. I didn't put a winter picture in here, but even those plants that lose their leaves still have a beauty within them, even in the winter time, because you see the gorgeous structure of those trees. But I did put in, again, down at ground level, autumn, fall. Many of these things change color. The Japanese maples are fantastic. I have some euonymus that is fantastic. Even the hosta goes down with beautiful color. But the beauty of it is I have enough evergreens there that really accentuate that color. And so I totally enjoy planning and planting a 4 seasons garden. Now, let's take a closer look at the area that I want to talk to you about today. Okay, we're going to enter that area from my front garden. And what you are seeing here is the corner foundation planting of my home. There is an entire ground cover all across the front of Pachysandra. No, it is not the native Pachysandra, because I love the way this Pachysandra spreads. It's quick to spread, whereas the native one for me is a little slow. Planted within that Pachysandra and competing really well with that Pachysandra is a stilby and a large hosta. Behind it, and the foundation, which has the heavy red berries, is the nandina. All right, going on beyond that, you'll see that big border of Ostrich Fern, which planted itself. It is incredibly interesting all through the summer season. It does not want to go bone dry, however. And this area, while it's wet for a portion of the year, and some things simply won't grow there because they don't like their feet that wet, in the late summer, sometimes it can dry out, and I really have to water that if I want to keep it up, okay? But other than that, it's completely low key. And then when the foliage dies back in the late fall, it has the most interesting spikes of the spores from this that are just beautiful. So there's a lot of charm for these plants other than just being colorful. These are growing partly beneath Japanese maple and a Burford holly. Now, let's take the path, and I have pathways that lead you through my garden. So let's take one of those pathways, which is primarily slate edged with brick. And as we are passing from that side yard into the backyard, which is we're going to talk about more, this is the underplanting, which is surrounded by those ostrich fern. And the low, colorful plant that you're seeing here is very underused. It's saxifraga. Strawberry begonia is a common name, saxifraga. And just at the border of that is liriope. Throughout my garden, I have used liriope as an edging. Now, let me make this comment because it is really important. This is the clumping liriope. There is a spreading one, liriope spicata. You do not want that plant unless you've got a huge bank. You can just let it go. This clumper never leaves the border, okay? And I absolutely love it. It has beautiful purple flowers in late summer, and the only care required for it is trimming it back in early March before the new growth begins. So that's the border on one side of that bed. Now you're seeing the flagstone as it's leading you. This is leading you from my back side door, leading you into the back family area, okay? And we talked about what is, as I'm looking at it, my left, and on the right is a repeat of the edging of that saxifraga. And then there is a row of boxwood. I am extremely fond of boxwood. Okay, in this next picture, I'm looking back on that border. So you're seeing the edge of that flagstone. Again, as I'm looking at it, on my left are plants that I really enjoy. Theorist, Japonica. Theorist, Japonica. But this is the dwarf form of Theorist japonica. And there's a variegated form that I really like also. I advise you to plant this plant along with azaleas and rhododendron. They're happiest where they either get full morning sun, great dappled light, but not the hottest afternoon sun. If you expose those to the hottest afternoon sun, they have a tendency to get a little buggy, and I don't like that because I don't like spraying things, okay, with chemicals if it can possibly be avoided. You are also seeing the large Burford holly that has all those ferns and that strawberry begonia beneath it. Okay, now if I'm standing on that pathway and looking back to my patio and deck, which is off my back of my house and steps down to the patio, this is what it's like in late spring, early summer. And there's not a lot of color there from flowers. But what is there is multi-layering. You've got that canopy of those big trees. You've got the understory trees. You've got the color and the texture of the plants that are there. The hosta. The big leaf near the bottom of that picture is Brunera. It is a perennial and it's not in bloom, but it has beautiful little forget-me-not flowers on it in the springtime. And then colorful foliage later that goes through the summer and into the fall. So you have so much interest here from the color within the foliage of those plants and the shapes and the forms of those plants. Now, standing on that deck, you can look back down and you can see a bit of the patio. And beneath those Japanese maple, but not totally beneath, but certainly protecting it a little bit from the hottest afternoon sun, there are azaleas and that mixture of fern and hosta. I have a tendency to put plants in groupings. If I use only one plant, it's usually as an accent plant, and that could be an accent of an ornamental grass that isn't invasive, and I use a lot of the carex and the smaller grasses that are not invasives and don't set seed. But also I have a repetition in that grouping. Now, this is the kind of grouping that you can use if you have a small garden, if you have a condo backyard garden where there is some shade. And this certainly will accept some sun too, but just not the hottest of the afternoon sun. This is a close-up of that same bed that you saw just beneath the azalea. You can see that I have a good large swath of hosta, and they're all the same variety. And behind that, there's actually a boxwood and some hellebores that's not in bloom. And then you can see the real change of height and texture from the fern. And that is actually brilliant. It's a wonderful, wonderful fern that's primarily evergreen. At this time of the year, all the old fronds need to be taken away. And then the new ones come. And the new ones are, that's why it's called brilliant. It's very colorful and stays that way for quite a while before it turns primarily green. And you are seeing the levels that are there because there's a lower patio here, which we'll see a little bit more of later. It is to the entrance of the lower level of my home. And so you've got the interest of the step down there, the way it's planted. And then I have more interest and more color in the summertime from the containers. And I'm very fond of terracotta. And I'm very fond of accenting that color with blue, the cobalt blues preferably. But that's my favorite thing. I love the terracotta because it's like your good black dress. You can dress it up or dress it down as you wish.
Hey,
and so there's more color there on the other side of this with annuals. Yes, Danny, did you have a question?
yeah, some people were asking about the grass that's in the container there to the right.
Hakanakloa. Hakanakloa. Hakonicchloe. Hakanakloa. And I hope, Danny, if you can follow along with me, I have written down on that outline. If you look at number 11, have you been able to do that?
Yep, I'm following along, but I figured you might want to talk about it.
And that's fine. I love Hakanakloa, and it's beautiful in containers or in the ground. This is one that turns brown in late fall and winter, but I leave it up because the brown foliage is great. It's a nice contrast. And then I only cut it back. Well, I cut it back about 3 weeks ago, usually in February, because now it's coming up with all fresh Hakanakloa. And I love it in mass plantings or in singles here, in groupings. It is one of the most useful plants that I have in my garden. So let's look at the next one. Now, just a part of that particular garden, because you can see just a little bit of that Hakanakloa on the left-hand side of this picture. That is that dwarf Theorist Japonica. And there are actually 2 of them planted there, and I have enjoyed them so much. But the underplanting of this is important to me. That is a beautiful, beautiful small shrub that is absolutely great for shade, part shade. And it actually will go into some fairly deep shade. And that is Sarcacoa. That's another mouthful. Sarcocca. Sarcacoa. Now, if you want to, easier to remember, perhaps it's commonly called sweet box. Okay, sweet box. This is the dwarf form of Theorist Japonica underplanted with Sarcacoa. Now, there is on the right-hand side, again, the leaf of that Brunera, which I really do enjoy. And the leaves are very attractive. They can be a solid green, but most have some variegation in it. Here's another Theorist Japonica. The one that I was showing you earlier is white, but there are so many beautiful ones. And this particular one I actually took at the garden center and it's not the dwarf form. So they can, over a long period of time, get certainly 8 feet tall, more than that really, but over a really long period of time, okay? I would say 8 feet. If you start with a 3-foot plant, 8 feet in 5 years, maybe, you know. So it's not a plant that gets way out of whack, okay? And if you happen to have a really old one and it's getting a little leggy, don't throw it out because it's so beautiful and the form can be lovely. You can actually limb it up and plant beneath it. It's just I love that plant. It's beautiful. And the foliage, the new foliage color is lovely too, okay? Now, in that area bordering the patio, there's also a little fountain there. And around that fountain, as a border of that section of the bed, there's the green grassy look at the bottom is Mondo Grass. That is another favorite. I like the Liriope. It's taller, it's bigger, it serves that big purpose of being the border. And all you have to do is not edge the bed, but run the lawnmower right up next to it. So it saves you a lot of work, saves me a lot of work. Well, in lesser areas where the demands aren't quite as great on it, I love Mondo Grass, and there's the Mondo Grass that gets to be 4 to 5 inches. And then there's a little dwarf form that's adorable. So Mondo Grass is a wonderful shade plant, and it accepts a lot of shade too. This borders that little bed, and flowing out over it, you see Hosta, and then there's fern in the background, a couple of different varieties of fern. And for a colorful accent there where it's fairly shady, there's caladium. I love the caladium. You can plant them in containers inside right now to get them started because they do not like cold soil. Do not put your caladiums in cold soil or cold temperatures. They like it warm. We will have those growing in the annual section, and they are wonderfully colorful accents. You can see part of that little Mondo Grass, part of the Hosta, and then here's another Carex. Grasses, I absolutely love the contrast of the grasses, and these are not invasive. If you have a nice large clump, you can actually lift it up, and I, with a heavy knife, can cut that into sections and replant it. So that's one way you can reproduce that Carex. I cut back. It's kind of like thinning hair in February or early March to take away some of the foliage that doesn't look very good after winter. But I don't like to shear this one way back hard. For me, it just sometimes dies. I know Romero here in our perennial section can seem to trim it back and it'll live. If I trim it back heavy, it dies. So don't do that. Just give it a little haircut, okay? So you've got that same little vignette that I showed you earlier, but now you're turning the corner, you're getting nice morning light or dapple light through the day, and my, the impatiens thrive there. Now we have the beautiful impatiens that resist the powdery mildew, and so they're back again, and also the New Guinea impatiens. So those will give you color throughout the entire summer. There are other things too. It could be begonias. And there are a lot of different kinds of begonias. Lovely. Also, in that general vicinity is hydrangea. I have a lot of hydrangea and I totally enjoy it. They don't bloom well in deep shade, so don't really plant them in deep shade. A lot of them now accept afternoon sun pretty well. I have some that were once in afternoon shade. Now they're in hot sun, and I have to water them more often. So you might have to do that too. And the reason is, of course, I lost a big tree. So our gardens change. And sometimes we have to change with them. And if we lose something, I just tell myself, well, that gives me the opportunity to try something else, okay? Because you will lose something now and then. So here again, I have groupings, a change of texture and size with the hosta and the fern, but it's done in such a way that it's grouped, not just a big mass of one thing, which gives me the opportunity to have a lot more plants. And I like plants. Okay, just across from this patio, down from the deck, is a border of boxwood. It's a long border of boxwood. If you need to trim your boxwood, I do some trimming so that I can use the prunings at Christmas time. And I go deep inside to open it up so that the air can get inside. But now is a good time to prune if you need to prune boxwood just before the new growth is strong and beginning to grow, because those cuts will be much more aesthetically pleasing if you do that now. Okay, so here is another Carex. I think this one is Evergold, but it may be Everilla. I kind of get those names because there's so many of these Carex now. Some are variegated. It's just a lovely plant. And if there were 15 of these here in that small space, it might be overpowering, but I love the golden within that very shady area, because this area only gets dapple light throughout the day. And yet they're thriving. Different type of fern, different types of hosta. There's also a lot of helleborus in this area, and there's a lot of charm going on all the time. Now, closer up of that area, two different types of ferns. They all are lovely. You just need to choose the variety that pleases you. I like it that the fern in the background picks up the color of that particular hosta. I've ceased to try to remember the names of all the hosta, but that one sticks because the name of it is June, June, and it is absolutely one of my favorites. So now you have a repeat of that color within the plant material, and that's a good thing. Another plant that is beautiful, it needs some sunshine. This will actually grow in full sun, but it's very bright in full sun. I love it best when it gets full morning sun or really good dapple light during the day. It's Osmanthus, Osmanthus, Osmanthus koshiki. These are the fall blooms. Now, that variegated foliage is lovely all season long. And it can get 5 to 6 feet tall, certainly over a 10-year period, but it's easy to keep it less than that. And this little flower is so fragrant, you do not have to go up to it to smell it. It comes out to greet you. And usually in my garden, that's in late September, early October. Now, in that same garden where I said it was bordered with boxwood and had the carex and the ferns and the hosta, there's also some upright boxwood. And there's variegated forms too, but this is the green form. And here again, I enjoy some accents within the garden, and this one is really accented. The vertical shape, because the shape and the textures of these plants that work together and give you some contrast adds a lot of interest within your garden. And so here that boxwood is a background that accentuates the statuary. In front of that, growing as a ground cover, is Tiarella. There's Tiarella. It looks very much like Coral Bells. Coral Bells does better for me in containers, but this Tiarella makes a wonderful ground cover, and it also has a beautiful bloom on it in mid to late spring. Okay. Now, who could be without camellias? Even in a very small garden, a camellia is a great accent. And thinking back to my granddaughter's garden as we're trying to plan some of the things that she wants to add, this would be a very good one to be within the fence where it gets full morning sun. You've got the beauty of the leaves from the camellia, and then the Camellia sasanqua, the ones that bloom in the fall, are my best. I love them. But this one happens to be a spring bloomer. And in the next picture, that's an up close of that camellia blossom. Please don't ask me which one it is. It's been in for many years, and I long since lost the name of it, okay? So I don't let that bother me anymore, you know. Just buy yourself a beautiful camellia. Okay, we've been within that same area, which is down from my deck, in the backyard, a major outdoor living space for us, taken in with some choices from among these plants. If you have a lot of shade in a small garden, you've got a lot to choose from. Let's go down the steps. This is a change of grade. Going to go down the steps to the sunken patio, which has doors into my lower level of my home. This is pretty interesting because they're here again. They're planted primarily beneath the Japanese maples, the upright Japanese maples. There are still the cascading maples that pick up the color tone of that. The color tone of the taller maple and the shorter maple is similar. Repetition of color within the plant. But as you're going down for the summer, to add a little more interest, are caladiums. And there's so many beautiful colors. Impatiens would work well here. Begonias would work well here. And you can color coordinate your caladiums with the color of the impatiens or the begonias and have this beautiful textural color from within the plants, but then you've added color also from flowering plants. Looking back from the opposite direction, what you saw before was the steps going down, and now you see some repetition on the other side, framed by the boxwood. Okay. The heavier stem that you see in the center is actually a very large Japanese maple. Now let's look at some of the plants, a close-up that are planted in that multi-level flower beds, okay? Here is a favorite. I like my evergreens. I like them to be mixed within the garden to give it structure. It needs that structure. And the year-round, even it be green color. Because that hosta isn't going to be evident during the winter time. And although the grass, which is that Sarcacoa, will be evident, but it'll be brown. This is a Japanese yew, and it cascades just beautifully. So I love it. And so it's there with the hosta, which is a nice contrast of color, but of form, the shape of that plant. Now, within that same area, across from that, here again, you've got a lot of texture going on here. A lot of interest in the texture of the plant itself. This one is English yew, and it is a spreader. You can get the upright. They are wonderful. I must tell you, however, they are not deer resistant, okay? There is a false yew that you can buy that is deer resistant, that's very similar to this, but this is a magnificent plant if you don't have issues with deer. And there's a cascading maple that's growing over with this. And actually, there is a little vining plant that's just beginning to vine that I absolutely love. And I wish I had a picture of it in its mature form. It's a summertime thing. And it actually is usually, it's solanum. It's actually called a sweet potato vine, but it's not truly a sweet potato vine. Now, underneath that big maple that I showed you earlier, and this is still a part of that lower garden, is a mass planting of that Sarcacoa, sweet box Sarcacoa. Beautiful, low-growing, evergreen, blooms fragrant tiny blossoms in early March. Very lovely. And as this is one that doesn't like the hottest afternoon sun, but will grow in a considerable amount of shade. And then you have in the next one, again, still part of that, and next to that Japanese yew interest, you've got the Tiarella with the blossoms, and there are actually some allium seed heads in that particular one. And across from all of this is where I have a lot of dogwood and a lot of Japanese maple. I also have a waterfall, a water garden back in that area. And all around that large oak are ground covers. I need to cover large spaces because my space is large. And I have to try to keep down somewhat on the maintenance. I absolutely love Pachysandra. And so I have a mass planting of it here, and there's a mass planting across from there underneath the dogwood. And then to contrast with that is the liriape, the clumping liriape. And there's some hosta growing out of that. So I'm incredibly fond of myself, Pachysandra, and liriape. Now, some people think that that's too common for them. It is not common for me. I totally love it. And this is how you can get summer color if you planted a lot of these beautiful plants that give you color in the leaf, contrast of texture, form, size. You can either plant in-ground annuals or you can do it in containers. This is really interesting. It did really well for me this year. It has the Euphorbia Ascot Rainbow, which is a repeat for the Carex that's in there. There's New Guinea Impatiens, the Fuchsia Gartenmeister that the hummingbirds love. There's a lot going on. So add your color with annuals. Now, I'm going to give little Clara a rest. I have been using Clara in a lot of my seminars. She's 3.5. And now she's soon going to be joined by her little sister, Lydia. But I need some stronger help, and maybe you do too. But the thing of it is, when you've got grandchildren, if you've got a willing worker, give them something that's interesting. So this is Liam, and he was helping me last summer. And I needed a little border. And I had some small stones, and he created it himself. Guess what? When he walks by that, he's very proud of it. let's talk a little bit about some of the important things, and I do want to leave a little bit of time for some questions, although it looks like there's not going to be much. I do need to say, identify your shade. Know whether it's moist or if it dries out a great deal, because there are plants that are better suited to those situations, and you'll have less upkeep if you try to put the right plants in the right place. And we have a lot of people who can help you with those decisions. Now, what about, you're going to say to me, my soil is really mostly clay. Well, so is mine. But over the years, that soil has definitely improved. I don't recommend that you go out and really dig a great deal beneath your existing trees, because those roots are closer to the ground than you might think, and you don't want to damage them. It's one thing to make pockets within that, okay? Or if you want to do a ground cover, cautiously put that ground cover in. What I do primarily is I use my compost, because I have a big area and I compost my leaves. But sometimes I don't have enough. I use a product that we sell here called Leaf Grow. It comes in bags, it's composted leaves. There are some other things, other products in bags that are very good too. And what I like to do is, at least once a year, add an inch or two of that to my soil. And as I plant the annuals, obviously I don't have to replant a lot of these things. But if you're planting them originally, you're going to work that into your soil. But I'm going to let the worms each year bring that into the soil. Once these are somewhat established, I'm going to mulch. I have a preference for the Virginia Fines, hardwood mulch. And when I mulch, it's pretty appropriate. Right now is a good time for me to do that, because I depend a lot on the little seedlings that I get. And I want to see those first before I heavily mulch. But people on a slope need threaded hardwood, because that locks itself together. The Virginia Fines will wash if it's on the slope, okay? So fertilization, I'm going to try to cover this quickly, and it looks like I'm not going to have much time for questions, Danny. Plantone, organic. If you're an organic gardener, this is a great time to fertilize, okay? Lightly fertilize around it. Yes, would you hand me that, honey? Thank you so much, Kelly. Kelly's helping me today. Okay, Plantone, Espoma makes this. Plantone or Garden Tone, they're very similar. And I keep bags of these around all the time. So this is a great fertilizer. It's all organic, okay? Now, if you're not an all organic person, we have our own Merrifield brand, and then we have, this is for the lawn, tree and shrub food, okay? And it really is a great fertilizer too. You can also use slow release. Again, these are not organic. If you have problems with deer, which I do, and I keep a constant supply of this Bobbex, B-O-B-B-E-X. There are others also, and some people prefer some of the other brand names, or some like to alternate. I have consistently used this, following the directions, read the directions. At this time of the year, when you're getting rapid spring growth, I may spray my Hosta, my daylilies, my oriental lilies every couple of weeks, because they're growing so fast, and I do not want the deer. They're just breakfast, lunch, and dinner for the deer, okay? So it doesn't wash off in a rain, but in the spring, when you get rapid growth, you may need to fertilize, to spray every 2 or 3 weeks. After that, once a month or longer is just fine for me. I want to have good tools. I need to have my Joyce chin handy, because there's a lot of deadheading going on. I wish I had time to talk about all these things behind me, but I don't. because there's a lot more to it than the plants that we talked about. Over in this area, there's Columbine. There's a beautiful, beautiful dark euphorbia. But look at this. I love this euphorbia because it has a tiny fleck of the gold. And here is that Avarilla carex. There's some beautiful, but look at that. Doesn't that look good together? If you had a small planting of each of these together would be fine. And then as a spring bloomer that kind of disappears after spring, but that's okay. It gives room for other things. There's so many different colors of Columbine, but I tried to combine some of these color tones that really look good together. There's even Enlamium is a wonderful thing too. And that this particular one has a little gold tone. So look how that plays with that. This one in the spring has lovely blooms. And again, in the spring, you just can't beat this. I have a lot of this. And again, this is a native plant. This is Phlox stolonifera. Phlox divaricata is very similar, but these are all wonderful shade plants. And you can't beat the violas. They bloom even into the heat. And containers. This one actually has some different stuff. This is Coreodalis. That particular variety I have not grown before, but I do have other Coreodalis, which bloom off and on through the summer. I prefer my coral bells in containers. And then I've got this wonderful, it's called Charmed Wine. Okay, it is an oxalis. But look at it, if you can see the color pickup there is fantastic. And a carex in the back with Laciniaceae in the front. Then we mentioned earlier the wonderful coral bells that's in here. This looks a lot like it, but it's Tiarella. Tiarella. And then I've got to tell you about Pulmonaria. This is a beauty. It blooms at this time of the year, has magnificent foliage. And if you leave the bloom zone and let the seeds set, it also drops seedlings, which I love that. And they usually come very true to form, very nice. Okay, Danny, maybe time for one or two questions.
Sounds good. Well, we definitely have more than one or two questions here. So first question from one of our viewers was going back to that fern. I was wondering if there was any special care that they needed for over the winter.
Absolutely not. All of the ferns that we carry down there, pretty much all of them are very winter hardy.
Gotcha. All right. So the next question up is one of our viewers has a townhouse back garden that receives a lot of shaded morning sun, no afternoon sun at all, and the soil's pretty damp. What do you recommend for a place like that?
Almost everything we talked about.
Almost everything we talked about. All right. Piggybacking with that one is another one of our viewers has a large tree that he plants his shaded plants under that. Do you recommend anything for that? Because he's worried about the tree taking the nutrients from that plant.
And of course they will. And it depends upon what kind of tree it is. And we didn't have time to talk about all of this, but the oak trees are very generous with the nutrients. If you have a Norway maple, which if I had, I would have to take it down because they're so surface roots. And there are a few other things that have a lot of surface roots. And if you do, you can't solve the problem by putting a lot of topsoil on top of it because plants resent that. It's best to just go ahead and create, if you've got that kind of tree, it's best to create a sitting area beneath it or use plants in containers. It depends upon what his tree is. If it is in a tree, you can do, as we discussed earlier in this program, you can add some leaf grow, a couple of inches, and plant within it, and then mulch with an inch or two, and you'll be fine. You'll just have to add a little more fertilizer and maybe give it a little bit more water when it gets dry, as it invariably will, to compensate for what the tree is getting. But if it's maples, not Japanese maples now, we're talking about the big maples, which are gorgeous in the autumn, but they're not gorgeous to plant things beneath because they're very hungry and very surface rooted. So again, as I say, compensate with some additional fertilizer and some additional water, and or plant in containers and make a little sitting area beneath it. Okay.
Wonderful, wonderful. Going on, you touched, a lot of people were asking about the deer in your garden, and you touched on that with Bobex.
Yes, Bobex works for me, but depending upon what you have, okay, I use a pump sprayer because I have a huge area. It comes with a little spray bottle, and that's fine if you've only got 3 or 4 plants and it's a small area, but most people have more than that. And so I keep a good pump sprayer on hand, and I buy the larger sizes of this and follow the directions as far as the mixing is concerned. One thing that you do not want to do with Bobex, mix up what you think you're going to use and use it all up, and be prepared to go in and take a shower when you're finished, because you're not going to smell very good. Fortunately, the fragrance disappears within a day, and you don't have to worry about that. But the deer don't like the taste of those things. Sometimes little Bambis haven't learned they're not supposed to eat those things, so occasionally Bambi will munch on something, but primarily if I do what I'm supposed to do and don't get distracted, this really saves a lot of things in my garden. Okay, so Bobex is great. Just use it according to the directions. Okay, and as I said, if you've tried some of the other brands, I haven't, I couldn't tell you whether they work for me or not, because this is what I use consistently and it continues to work for me. Okay,
gotcha. Going off of the Bobex, is that also safe for dogs? Like, would that keep the dogs at bay? And if not, is there any plants that are safe for dogs, shade plants that you'd recommend?
you know what, I'm not going to get into that because that's another whole ball game. Okay,
Another whole ball.
Yeah, another whole ball game. I'm not sure, and I would never want to recommend something or not that would hurt a dog. Okay, generally speaking, I do not think any of the plants that I've talked about are a problem for the dogs, but no, I'm not going there.
Gotcha. All right.
Now, I don't think the Bobex would bother. It's all natural. It has a lot of peppers in it. I don't think the dogs would eat it. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Well, great. All right. Well, I think we are getting to the end for the day. I'd like to thank Peg for all of her expertise and everything. For the people that did not get their questions answered, we still had a bunch. Feel free to email either Sally at the email that I gave out before, sburrows@mgcmail.com, or you can reach out to me through our website, the contact us form. In terms of some people were asking about getting a plant list, we do have a plant list. Peg and I were talking about it earlier, and we're going to be sending that out with Sally. So if I think that is about it. Once again, this has been recorded, and if that will be on our YouTube page. I was able to text with Sally while Peg was talking. She's not able to talk, but she's able to text right now. And most of Peg's are going to be on our YouTube page, which you'll be able to find. But we'll also be sending that out in an email too. Peg,
before you close out, yeah, let me reiterate a couple of things. I think we've got time to do that.
Sure thing.
What I did was print out the pictures and I have written on those the plants, most of the plants, not all, but most of the plants that are in there. So Danny is going to have this, and he's going to send it also to Sally, so that if you missed it or you didn't write something down, we should be able to go back to this and pretty much know what you're talking about with that. And one thing that I always like to have a little commercial. I like to tell people what I want to have on hand. I don't want to go looking for stuff. I want to know where it is. And there's certain things in gardening, and you all pretty much hear about some of those things all the time. Okay. Last week, we told you about this incredible shovel, trowel, whatever, because it's almost indestructible. It's made in America. It's steel, stainless steel. It has leverage, but then I have begun using, because I have an awful weed that's within my garden. I'll never be without it, unfortunately. And I discovered that when I got down on hands and knees, this little guy, because it's very shallow rooted, would pop that thing out really easily. Okay. So not only am I enamored with the long handle one, now I'm enamored with the short handle one. And I'm very specific about what I like to garden with. And I know there are people that are like myself that don't get up and down quite as easy as you used to, but I love these foam kneeling pads. It really makes it so much easier, and they're lightweight and easy to move around. There's some people that use the little sliding low seats. I have trouble with that, but this so when I go out into the garden, I go with my Joyce Chin scissors, my good Felco pruners. I took these gloves off because they don't match very well, do they? It's nice when they match, I love these gloves. And I just talked to James this morning, and he hopefully has a new order coming in the next week or two. They are fox gloves, and I wear these all the time. I've become addicted to them. When I'm working with something wet, I put those inexpensive plastic ones on over it. So grab your gloves, grab your good tools, grab your kneeling pad. If I had my hat, yes, it's time for a hat too. So those are some of the things that I have to have when I go into the garden. I want them to be where I know they are, and gather them up, put them in my little basket, and head to the garden. So I hope that you have enjoyed this section of my garden today, and we will approach some of the other sections at a later date. Thank you for watching.
Thank you, Peg, and thank you, everybody. Have a wonderful rest of your day.